You know, there is a very specific, almost universal memory shared by like millions of people who grew up in the late 1990s.
I think I know exactly where you're going with this.
Yeah, well, picture the setup for a moment. You are, in the backseat of your parents' car, or maybe a minivan.
Right, a classic 90s minivan.
Exactly, and it is pitch black outside, perhaps raining. You are holding this chunky gray plastic brick in your hands.
The original Nintendo Game Boy.
The original Game Boy, yeah. And because that iconic olive green screen had absolutely no internal backlight.
None at all. You couldn't see a thing in the dark.
Right. You are entirely at the mercy of the environment, so you're waiting for the car to pass under a street lamp.
Oh man, the street lamp glow.
Yes. For like 3 glorious seconds, the screen illuminates in this wash of amber light, and you frantically try to, select an attack.
Or navigate your way out of a confusing digital cave.
Exactly, before you are just plunged back into total darkness. You sit there, thumb hovering over the A button, just waiting for the next streetlight.
It was horribly inconvenient. I mean, it caused massive eye strain.
It really did. But, it felt like absolute magic.
It really was. The dedication required to simply play the game, it transformed the experience into something much larger than a toy.
Totally.
You weren't passively sitting back on a couch watching a television screen.
Yeah.
You were physically wrestling with the hardware.
Working actively to just keep your connection alive to that tiny digital universe.
Exactly.
Well, welcome everyone to a very special, deeply relaxing deep dive.
It's great to be here.
Our mission today is to take a soothing, nostalgic stroll back to the mid-90s, specifically to the Kanto region of the very first Pokémon video games.
Right, so we're talking Pokémon Red, Blue, Green, and Yellow.
Yes, the originals.
Yeah.
And I want to set the parameters for our journey today, right off the bat.
Lay the ground rules.
Yeah. We are completely ignoring the fast-paced, high-stress world of modern competitive battling.
Oh, yeah. No complex meta strategies or tournaments today.
None of that. We are also setting aside the hyper-energetic, brightly colored TV show.
Just focusing on the games themselves.
Exactly. Instead, I invite you, the listener, to light a virtual candle, grab your coziest blanket, and just join us as we slowly unpack the quiet lore.
The gentle playground myths.
Yeah, and the deeply fascinating developmental secrets that made this 8-bit world feel so incredibly alive.
It's going to be a really fun ride.
It is. But before we step into the tall grass, I want to invite you to check out the YouTube channel Decoding the Dark.
They do some amazing work.
They really do. If the aesthetic of, peeling back layers of nostalgia to find the hidden architecture underneath appeals to you, their content is an absolute must-watch.
Oh, for sure. They take these deep, meticulously researched dives into the mysteries and hidden histories of pop culture.
So please take a moment to head over there, drop a like, and subscribe to help support their incredible work.
You definitely won't regret it.
So, to kick off our journey into Kanto, we have to look at the source material we are pulling from today.
Right, because we aren't just relying on childhood memories here.
No, definitely not. We have a massive stack of, translated developer interviews, deep-cut localization notes.
Our code analyses.
Yeah, and some really great retro gaming retrospectives. And looking through all this, the most striking theme is how the physical limitations of that gray plastic brick dictated the entire philosophy of the world.
Yeah, the hardware constraints were everything. But, the origin of that philosophy actually predates the hardware by a few decades.
Really? How so?
The foundation of this whole digital ecosystem traces back to the 1970s, to the childhood of the game's creator, Satoshi Tajiri.
Okay, right.
He grew up in Machida, which is a city in the western portion of the Tokyo metropolis.
And Machida today is like a huge commercial hub, right?
Oh, yeah. Today it's heavily developed and paved over. But during Tajiri's childhood, it was still largely rural.
So lots of nature.
Exactly. It was defined by dense forests, open rice paddies, and winding rivers. And Tajiri had a singularly focused, incredibly peaceful hobby.
Let me guess, he was an insect collector.
You got it. He was an avid insect collector. The practice of catching bugs, particularly rhinoceros beetles and stag beetles, is a, traditional summer pastime for children in Japan.
Right.
But Tajiri was so exceptionally dedicated to learning their habitats, understanding their behaviors, and finding new species under rocks and on tree bark that his peers actually gave him a nickname.
Oh, what was it?
Dr. Bug.
Dr. Bug. That is amazing. It sounds I don't know, idyllic. A kid running through the woods, mapping out the local ecosystem in his head, just completely absorbed in the quiet thrill of discovery.
It really does. But unfortunately, that landscape didn't last. Japan was going through a massive post-war economic boom.
The Japanese economic miracle, right?
Right. And the transformation of the landscape was aggressive and rapid. As Tajiri grew older, the rural environments of Machida were systematically paved over.
To make way for what? Apartment complexes and shopping malls?
Exactly. And all the infrastructure needed to support the expanding Tokyo population. The forests were leveled. The natural habitats vanished. And the insects he had spent his childhood tracking simply disappeared from the area.
That's actually really sad.
It is. Tajiri eventually shifted his focus to the booming arcade culture and video game design, but he carried this profound sense of mourning for that lost natural world.
You know, that reframes the entire premise of the game for me. It isn't just a monster battling simulator.
No, not at all.
It is like a digital conservation project. He was trying to bottle that specific psychological thrill of walking into a forest and finding something hidden in the grass.
Exactly. He wanted a new generation of kids, the ones growing up in concrete apartment buildings, to still feel that exact same adrenaline rush.
So the tall grass in the game isn't just a mechanic to trigger battles, it's literally a memorial to the fields of Machida.
That's a great way to put it. That underlying motivation to preserve the joy of discovery drove the initial concept.
Which he originally pitched under a different name, right?
Right. He originally pitched it to Nintendo under the name Capsule Monsters.
Capsule Monsters, that has a very retro sci-fi ring to it.
It does. And that's because the name was a direct homage to a classic 1967 Japanese sci-fi television show called Ultra 7.
Oh, okay.
In that show, the protagonist utilized giant monsters that he actually carried around in small capsules on his belt.
So the transition from a massive city-destroying kaiju to something you could fit in your pocket, that was the conceptual breakthrough.
Exactly. And when you look at the very early design sketches by lead artist Ken Sugimori, the monsters heavily leaned into that dinosaur-like functional aesthetic.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they weren't necessarily cute pets at first. They were rugged creatures meant to assist humans in practical ways.
Like carrying heavy loads or acting as transportation across water.
Right, very utilitarian.
Knowing that, it makes total sense that the very first Pokemon ever designed and programmed into the game's code wasn't Pikachu.
No, definitely not Pikachu.
And it wasn't Bulbasaur either, even though Bulbasaur famously sits at the number 001 spot in the official Pokedex.
Right. The very first creature they built was actually Rhydon.
Rhydon, the massive bipedal rock rhino.
Yeah, Rhydon perfectly encapsulates that early capsule monster design philosophy. I mean, it is essentially a miniature dinosaur with armor plating.
That makes a lot of sense.
And because it was the first creature fully programmed and tested within the game engine, Rhydon holds the internal hexadecimal index code of 001.
Oh, wow. So from a coding perspective, it's the baseline.
Exactly. Whenever the game needs to reference a blank or default state in certain early memory banks, it defaults to Rhydon.
And the developers left a permanent, quiet monument to this origin story hidden in plain sight, didn't they?
They did.
If you boot up a copy of Red or Blue and walk into almost any Pokemon gym in the game, you will see two statues flanking the entrance.
Right.
They aren't just generic pillars, they are detailed statues of a creature that looks exactly like Rhydon.
It's a brilliant way of acknowledging the literal foundational pillar of their universe.
The creature that proved the code actually worked gets immortalized at the entrance of every major challenge in the game. It's beautiful.
It really is. But their design process wasn't just interesting at the start. The way they engineered the most famous characters, the 3 starter choices, was entirely backward to standard logic.
Backward, how do you mean? I would assume they designed the cute, marketable baseline versions first and then figured out how to make them bigger.
You'd think so, but they took the exact opposite approach. The design team recognized that the core loop of an RPG, the repetitive grinding of levels, requires a massive psychological payoff.
Oh, okay. So if you were going to spend 40 hours raising a digital creature, the final result needs to feel incredibly rewarding.
Precisely. So they started by designing the final, fully evolved forms first: Venusaur, Charizard, and Blastoise.
Ah, so they focused on creating imposing, powerful, aspirational monsters from the jump. That is the ultimate delayed gratification mechanic. You see a silhouette of a dragon on the box art, and you want it, but you are handed a tiny orange lizard with a flame on its tail.
Right. And once they had finalized the designs for those massive final forms, they worked backward.
How did they do that?
They systematically deconstructed the designs. They softened the edges, enlarged the eyes to create infantile proportions, and stripped away the intimidating features.
Until they arrived at the base forms of Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle.
Exactly. The entire evolutionary line was an exercise in reverse engineering cuteness from a starting point of intimidation.
That is fascinating. So they figured out the monsters, they engineered the evolutionary payoff, but they still needed a central mascot, right? The face of the franchise.
They did.
My brain immediately defaults to Pikachu because, the electric yellow mouse is arguably one of the most recognizable pieces of iconography in human history at this point.
Oh, absolutely.
But the sources confirm that Pikachu was kind of a late-stage usurper to the throne.
Yeah, that's entirely true. The original intended mascot for the franchise was actually Clefairy.
Clefairy.
Yeah, Clefairy is a pink, somewhat chubby, star-shaped fairy Pokemon.
Right. And what was the logic there?
The design logic was sound at the time, really. Clefairy is undeniably cute, round, and approachable. It resembles a traditional stuffed animal.
So they thought it would have broad appeal.
Exactly. The developers believed this design would appeal heavily to young girls, broadening the demographic beyond boys who just wanted to battle monsters.
Okay, that makes sense.
In fact, if you read the very first official Pokemon manga serialization, the protagonist's primary partner is a loud, obnoxious Clefairy. Pikachu is merely a side character.
Wait, really? That's wild. I try to imagine the cultural butterfly effect if they had stuck with Clefairy.
It would have been completely different.
Imagine a world where the defining aesthetic of this multi-billion-dollar franchise is pastel pink instead of electric yellow. It changes the entire visual temperature of the 90s.
It really does.
You would walk down the toy aisle at a department store, and instead of a wall of sharp, energetic yellow packaging catching your eye, it would just be a sea of soft pink.
Right. So the pivot to Pikachu was largely driven by the development of the animated television series.
Ah, the TV people got involved.
Yeah. The animation executives and marketing teams realized that Pikachu had a much more universal appeal that crossed traditional gender lines without alienating anyone.
That makes total sense.
But perhaps more importantly, the choice of the color yellow was a masterstroke in retail psychology.
How so?
In the late 90s, if you looked at primary character mascots globally, the only other major character dominated by the color yellow was Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, wow. I never thought about that.
Right. Yellow is visually arresting. It contrasts sharply against almost any background, and from a distance, a yellow product on a shelf instantly communicated the brand.
So Pikachu took the job purely based on universal demographic appeal and aggressive color theory?
Pretty much.
But no matter what color the mascot was, every single piece of this world had to be compressed into a physical Game Boy cartridge.
And that was a monumental task.
And the memory limitations of that cartridge dictated one of the most defining and emotional mechanics of the entire experience.
The save file limit.
Yes. If you played these original games, you know the golden rule. There is only one save file.
Just one.
You cannot have file 1 for yourself and file 2 for your sibling. You either share the same character or you purchase a second physical game.
Which was a source of many sibling arguments.
Oh, absolutely. I always assumed this was just standard operating procedure for handheld games at the time, to save money on hardware.
It is easy to view it as a corporate cost-cutting measure, but the reality of the engineering tells a different story.
Oh, really?
Yeah. A Game Boy cartridge utilizes SRAM, that's static random access memory, which is powered by a tiny watch battery inside the cartridge to hold your saved data.
Right, the infamous internal battery.
Exactly. And the total available SRAM on these specific cartridges was 32 kilobytes.
32 kilobytes?
Yeah. To put that in perspective, a standard low-resolution photograph on a modern smartphone is about 2,000 times larger than the entire save memory of this game.
2,000 times larger, so they had 32 kilobytes to save an entire world state. That is nothing.
Yes, and the developers made a crucial philosophical decision early on. They wanted players to be able to assign custom nicknames to every single Pokemon they caught.
Right, to build that connection.
Exactly. They felt this personalization was essential to creating an emotional bond with the digital creatures. You could catch up to 240 Pokemon and store them in your PC boxes.
And here is where the math becomes the enemy of the hardware, I'm guessing.
You guessed it.
Because every single text character you input for a nickname requires a byte of data.
Exactly. Storing a binary flag that says, player caught a Pidgey takes almost no space. But storing a 10-character custom text string like bird friend for all 240 potential Pokemon requires a massive allocation of volatile memory.
Oh, wow.
When you factor in the custom nicknames, the unique stats, the experience points, the captured locations, and the current hit points for every single creature in storage.
The PC box system just devoured the available SRAM.
It ate it all up. To facilitate the emotional connection of naming your monsters, the engineers had to completely sacrifice the space required to generate a second save file.
That is incredible. That technical compromise fundamentally turns the physical cartridge into, like, a childhood diary.
That's a beautiful way to look at it.
You couldn't just tear out a page or start a new chapter without permanently destroying the history of what was already written.
And backups.
Right. If you caught a digital turtle and named it after your dog, that name was physically occupying a microscopic sector of silicon inside the plastic shell. You couldn't just boot up an alternate file to try picking a different starter. Your specific journey, your mistakes, and the quirky names you chose were cemented into the hardware.
The limitation fostered permanence. In an era where modern games allow you to endlessly save scum or maintain dozens of branching save states, the strict singular reality of that 32-kilobyte memory bank made the stakes feel incredibly high.
Because your choices mattered, because they were irreversible.
Exactly.
That permanence made the digital world feel deeply real to us. And the developers actually doubled down on that feeling of reality by anchoring the game's lore directly to our actual planet.
This is one of my favorite topics.
It's so strange, right? Looking back at the original text, when the game was built and subsequently translated for the rest of the world, it was littered with real-world geography.
It really was. Within the community of gaming historians, this early era of world building is often affectionately referred to as the Tajiri canon.
The Tajiri canon.
Yeah. Before the franchise exploded into a global multimedia empire requiring a completely separate fictional multiverse, the creators seemingly viewed the setting as an alternate adjacent version of planet Earth.
I mean, the most obvious piece of evidence is the name of the region itself.
Right.
The entire game takes place in Kanto. And Kanto is not a fantasy name generated by a computer. It is the literal name of the geographical region in Japan that encompasses Tokyo and Tajiri's hometown of Machida.
They mapped the digital world directly onto the real world. The layout of the cities, the bays, and the mountains in the game roughly correspond to the actual topography of the real-world Kanto region.
That's so cool.
But the connections go much further than topography. The internal encyclopedias, the Pokédex entries, and the dialogue from the non-player characters are packed with explicit references to real countries and real animals.
I completely glazed over these as a kid, but reading the source documents now, it is jarring.
Oh, it really is.
For example, the scattered journals you find late in the game, which document the discovery of the mythical Pokemon Mew, explicitly state that the creature was discovered deep in the jungles of Guyana, South America.
A real sovereign nation on the northern mainland of South America.
It's just sitting there in the text.
And the references continue. The fiery canine Pokemon, Arcanine, is described in the text as a legendary Chinese Pokemon.
Chinese Pokemon.
Yeah. And the entry for Raichu states that its electrical output is powerful enough to knock out an Indian elephant.
An Indian elephant. They didn't say it knocks out a giant Pokemon. They specifically referenced the Elephas maximus indicus, a literal earth animal.
Right, implying that regular animals coexist alongside these magical monsters.
And the corporate world building features it as well. A scientist working for the massive conglomerate Silphco mentions offhand that their company operates an international branch in Tixi, Russia. Yes. And the entry for the muscular frog Pokemon, Poliwrath, notes its incredible stamina allows it to swim the entire length of the Pacific Ocean.
It grounds the world so much.
And we can't forget the gym leader of Vermilion City, Eltine Surge.
Ah, yes.
He is a towering man in military fatigues, and the game explicitly refers to him as the Lightning American.
The Lightning American.
Yeah. When you speak to him before battling, he references a mysterious global conflict, stating, "You won't live long in combat, that's for sure." I tell you, kid, electric Pokemon saved me during the war.
So, casually mentioning a war.
I have to ask you, as an expert, does having real-world places mentioned make the fantasy more relaxing, or does it break the immersion? I mean, if I am reading a high fantasy novel about wizards and elves, and a character casually suggests grabbing a coffee at a Starbucks in Chicago,
Right.
it takes me completely out of the world.
Right, it can be jarring.
But somehow, as an 8-year-old playing this game, Hearing that Mew came from South America didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like a revelation.
Well, the psychology of childhood imagination plays a huge role here.
How so?
To a child, the world is already vast, mysterious, and largely unexplored. You don't possess a rigid mental map of global geopolitics.
That's true.
So, reading that a mythical creature was discovered in the jungles of South America doesn't break the fantasy. It actually validates it.
That grounds it.
Right. It suggests that the magic isn't confined to a fictional dimension. It exists on your planet, just slightly out of reach, perhaps a plane ride away. It made the mythology feel tangibly real.
Eventually, of course, the franchise grew too large for the confines of real-world Earth.
Oh, absolutely. They began to aggressively retcon these elements in later generations.
Right. China became vaguely referred to as the East, and the specific mention of an Indian elephant was later scrubbed and replaced with a reference to Kaparaja, a heavy elephant-like Pokémon introduced much later.
They had to clean up the canon.
But those Generation 1 artifacts remain permanently burned into the original code. They are a cozy time capsule of a much simpler, grittier vision of the universe.
Definitely. And, geography wasn't the only thing that got complicated. The actual process of translating the game from Japanese to English, the localization effort, was a monumental, deeply fraught undertaking.
I can only imagine.
It produced some of the most hilarious and bizarre quirks in gaming history.
Yeah, the technical hurdle of localization cannot be overstated. The original source code was notoriously fragile, wasn't it?
Oh, fragile is an understatement. In fact, Satoru Iwata, the legendary programmer who would eventually become the president of Nintendo, had to step in and personally analyze the raw code.
Wow, the big boss himself.
Yeah, he had to build a framework that would allow the localization teams to safely extract the Japanese text and insert English characters without causing the entire game engine to collapse.
Because the languages are so structurally different.
Exactly. Japanese characters can convey entire words or concepts in a single visual block, whereas English requires multiple characters to convey the same meaning. Fitting English words into user interface boxes designed for Japanese text was an absolute nightmare.
And beyond the technical spatial limits, they also had to navigate cultural censorship, didn't they?
Yes, big time.
They had to take a game developed by Japanese adults for Japanese children and sanitize it for the American and European markets.
And one of the funniest examples of this occurs in the very first hour of the game.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say. When you attempt to leave Viridian City to continue your journey, your path is blocked by an old man lying on the ground.
Yes. In the original Japanese script, the scenario is completely straightforward, albeit a bit mature.
Right.
The old man is passed out in the middle of the dirt road because he is severely intoxicated.
He's drunk.
He is sleeping off a drunken bender, and his grandson is standing nearby apologizing for his behavior.
Which is a remarkably gritty obstacle for a children's game. Sorry, kid, you can't start your magical adventure until the town drunk wakes up.
The English localization team understandably balked at that.
Yeah, I can see why.
They decided that depicting public intoxication as a mandatory plot roadblock was inappropriate for a global, all-ages release. So they fundamentally altered the narrative context of the sprite.
They rewrote the text to claim that the old man is simply incredibly grumpy and refuses to let anyone pass because he hasn't had his morning coffee yet.
Right.
And then once you complete a task in return, the text states he has finally had his espresso, his mood has improved, and he allows you to pass.
It's so silly.
It is such an incredibly adult corporate concept to project onto a mystical adventure. The grand hero's journey is paused due to caffeine withdrawal.
It really is funny.
Yeah.
But beyond deliberate cultural censorship, the localization process also produced genuine permanent linguistic accidents.
Oh, linguistic accidents.
Yeah.
Move Splash.
Yes, we have to talk about Splash.
Anyone who has ever played the game knows the tragedy of encountering a wild Magikarp. It is a useless fish that flops around using the move splash, and a text box pops up confirming, but nothing happened.
Splash is widely recognized as the most useless maneuver in the game, and players naturally assume it is a water-type move, because it is signature to a fish Pokemon splashing in a body of water.
Naturally.
However, if you look at the game's data, Splash is categorized as a normal type move.
Which makes absolutely no logical sense until you look at the translation files.
Right. The Japanese word originally assigned to the move was Hanaru, which translates directly to hop or jump.
Hop. Okay.
It was meant to describe a creature helplessly jumping up and down. When the localization team was working down the spreadsheet of attacks, they saw Hop assigned to a fish Pokemon and made a contextual leap, translating it as splash.
I mean, it is a totally reasonable localization choice in a vacuum. A fish hopping on land is indeed splashing.
Sure, but that localized choice created a massive logical disconnect in subsequent games,
How so?
because the developers started assigning the move to non-water Pokémon. For example, Hoppip, a small pink floating plant creature, learns the move. In Japanese, the plant is simply hopping up and down, but in English, the plant is splashing, despite being nowhere near water.
That's hilarious.
Because the game code locked in the English string splash, a momentary translation choice 30 years ago became permanent global canon. It confused millions of children who wondered why a dandelion was trying to splash them.
The linguistic mechanics of taking a cultural product and mapping it to a global audience is just fascinating.
It really is.
They also had to meticulously scrub out regional religious references to avoid alienating or confusing international players, right?
Yes. In the sprawling metropolis of Celadon City, if you explore the various buildings in the Japanese version, you can interact with small, specific pieces of furniture.
Right.
The original text identifies these objects as butsudan, which are traditional Buddhist shrines or altars commonly found in Japanese homes to pay respect to ancestors. The text explicitly points out their religious nature.
Finding a Buddhist shrine in a video game is a beautiful touch of realism, honestly.
It is, but the localization team viewed it as a liability. They wanted the game to be entirely secular, to maximize global appeal and avoid any potential theological backlash.
So what do they do?
So they didn't just remove the text, they fundamentally altered the reality of the object in the English version. If you walk up and inspect the exact same altar in the American release, the text box simply reads, "It's a sculpture of Diglett."
Diglett, the cartoon mole. I just imagine a frantic translator taping a picture of a cartoon mole over a secret ancestral shrine and declaring the problem solved.
It's wild.
It is a wonderfully pragmatic, duct tape approach to 90s game development, but not all localization changes were about coffee or cartoon moles.
No, some were much more serious.
The sources detail a much more serious cultural collision involving the Pokémon Jinx.
Right. The historical record surrounding Jinx highlights the friction that occurs when a localized product rapidly scales into a global phenomenon.
Can you walk us through that?
According to the original design documents and the sprite data from the Japanese releases, Jinx was designed as a humanoid creature with blonde hair, large pink lips, and jet black skin.
Okay, and when the games and subsequently the animated series reached the United States, that character design entered a completely different cultural context.
Exactly.
In the year 2000, a prominent culture critic and author named Carole Boston Weatherford wrote a widely circulated article. She pointed out that the design of Jinx bore a striking and uncomfortable resemblance to historically racist caricatures and blackface iconography prevalent in early Western media.
And the critique gained significant traction. Game Freak and Nintendo, realizing the severe cultural implications of the design in the Western market, made the decision to alter the character.
Right.
For all future international releases, and eventually retroactively in Japan, Jinx's skin color was changed from black to a bright, vibrant purple.
What is particularly fascinating from an engineering standpoint is how this cultural alteration collided with the hardware limitations of the era.
Oh, this part is crazy.
The sequel games were being developed for the Game Boy Color, which, despite the name, had strict restrictions on sprite rendering. A single combat sprite could only display 3 colors, plus a transparent background layer.
3 colors to render an entire creature.
Yes. Originally, Jinx's sprite used black for the skin, yellow for the hair, and red for the dress, with the white of the eyes doubling as the background transparent layer.
Right.
When the mandate came down to change the skin to purple, the sprite artists had a mathematical problem. They needed purple for the skin, red for the dress, and yellow for the hair. But they also needed black for the outline and facial details to make the sprite readable on the small screen. That is 4 colors.
They didn't have enough color slots in the hardware memory to support the cultural redesign.
Precisely. They were forced to sacrifice a color. In the earliest Game Boy Color iterations featuring the redesign, they had to drop the yellow entirely. Jinx was rendered with purple skin, a red dress, and pale, almost white blonde hair, purely because the hexadecimal color palette of the 8-bit hardware couldn't mathematically accommodate the cultural correction without losing a visual element.
It is a perfect microcosm of retro game development. A cultural critique leads to an artistic redesign, which immediately slams into the hard mathematical ceiling of a 32-kilobyte processor.
Speaking of uncovering complex histories and understanding the mechanics behind the media we consume, this is a perfect time to remind you about our sponsor today.
Yes.
Just like we are slowly peeling back the localization secrets and hardware limitations of Kanto, the YouTube channel Decoding the Dark specializes in uncovering the fascinating hidden truths embedded in our culture.
They do phenomenal deep dives.
They really do. They don't just skim the surface, they dig deep into the archives to explain the how and why behind historical mysteries, lost media, and pop culture anomalies.
It's top-tier research.
If you are enjoying this deep dive, you will feel right at home with their content. Please open up a tab, head over to Decoding the Dark on YouTube, drop a like on their latest video, and hit subscribe. Your support allows incredible research-heavy content to thrive.
Definitely go subscribe to Decoding the Dark. So, returning to the architecture of Kanto.
Yes, let's get back to it.
It is crucial to recognize that the developers didn't solely rely on text boxes or translation quirks to build their world. They understood that the most powerful narratives are often the ones the player discovers themselves.
Environmental storytelling.
Exactly. They utilized an incredibly sophisticated form of silent environmental storytelling.
This is where the game asks the player to become a virtual archaeologist.
That's a great way to put it.
Because there were no massive pre-rendered video cutscenes and absolutely zero voice acting, the developers had to arrange the physical architecture of the levels to imply a narrative.
And the crown jewel of this technique is the Pokémon Mansion on Cinnabar Island.
I push back on the idea that text is always inferior to cinematic cutscenes. If anything, the limitations force them to be subtle, and that subtlety is far more terrifying.
Oh, I totally agree. The Cinnabar Island Mansion is a masterclass in atmospheric pacing. The music immediately shifts to a jarring, atonal chiptune track.
It's so creepy.
It is. As you walk through the front door, you realize this isn't a standard building. The map tileset is totally unique. The walls are crumbling, the floorboards are decayed, and there are massive piles of rubble blocking the hallways.
The entire structure is a burned-out, abandoned shell.
Exactly. You're wandering through the aftermath of a disaster.
And as you navigate the rubble, clicking on standard-looking tables, you occasionally trigger a text box containing fragmented journal entries left behind by an unnamed researcher.
Heavily implied by the community to be Mr. Fuji, the kindly old man you met earlier in the game.
Right, and these journal entries are where the lore surrounding Guyana and Mew, which we discussed earlier, is finally revealed to the player, but the narrative quickly descends into horror.
It gets really dark.
The journals document a massive genetic engineering project. The text reads, Mew gave birth. We named the newborn Mewtwo.
Mew gave birth. That specific phrasing is so haunting.
I have always found that deeply unsettling. If you watch the cinematic movies that came out years later, Mewtwo is depicted as a standard sci-fi clone, grown in a bubbling, sterile glass tube filled with green liquid.
Right, very clinical.
But the original 8-bit text doesn't say clone, it says gave birth. It implies a biological, visceral, and perhaps deeply unnatural genetic mutation forced upon a living creature.
The biological implication adds a layer of gothic horror to the science fiction. As you venture deeper into the basement of the ruined mansion, the final journal entry simply reads, Mewtwo is far too powerful. We have failed to curb its vicious tendencies.
Vicious tendencies, and that is all you get. Just a few sentences.
But it's enough.
When you combine that stark text with the fact that you are physically standing in the charred remains of a heavily fortified laboratory, the human brain instantly connects the dots. The player understands exactly what happened without seeing a single frame of animation. The creature woke up, it realized what had been done to it, it went completely berserk, and it burned the facility to the ground before escaping into the wild.
Think about the profound, solitary feeling of standing in that empty digital basement. You are a 10-year-old kid, alone in your room with your Game Boy, piecing together a terrifying Frankenstein narrative purely through environmental context.
It respected the player's intelligence by refusing to hand-feed them the exposition.
It really did. And that respect for the player's intuition extends beyond the map design into the actual code of the game itself.
What do you mean?
When data miners began exploring the raw hex data of the ROM files years later, they discovered the ghosts of scrapped narrative arcs. They found a fully programmed, functional, and incredibly difficult battle against Professor Oak.
Professor Oak, the kindly grandfather figure who hands you your very first Pokemon at the beginning of the game.
The very same.
He is the ultimate mentor.
Yes. By manipulating the hex values in the game's RAM, players can force the engine to load this hidden battle. And what makes the battle so compelling is Oak's team composition.
What does he use?
He uses extremely high-level Pokémon, but specifically, his team includes the final evolution of the starter Pokémon that was left behind on the lab table.
That is brilliant narrative symmetry. You choose Bulbasaur. Your bitter rival steps up and actively counters you by choosing Charmander. And poor Squirtle is just left sitting in its ball on the table for the rest of eternity.
Exactly.
But the code reveals that Oak took that neglected creature and raised it alongside you.
The level scaling and the specific team composition strongly imply that Professor Oak was originally coded to be the true final boss of the game.
Really?
Yeah, you defeat the Elite Four, you defeat your rival, and then, as the ultimate test, the mentor steps out of the shadows to challenge you with the creature you left behind. It is the classic hero's journey trope. The student must inevitably surpass the master.
So why do you think they scrapped it? Did they run out of memory again?
It was likely a decision based on emotional pacing rather than memory constraints.
Okay.
The entire narrative engine of the game is driven by your burning animosity toward your rival, Blue. Defeating him at the very end provides a massive cathartic release.
That makes sense.
If Professor Oak immediately walked out and demanded a battle right after that, it would undercut the emotional weight of finally beating your childhood bully. They made the right narrative choice to cut it, but they left the battle parameters buried in the code.
A digital ghost of a story that never happened. It is fascinating to see the rough drafts of the universe preserved in the silicon. But, not all the coding quirks were deep, dramatic secrets.
No, definitely not.
Some of them were just incredibly funny, relaxing oversights resulting from the way 90s game engines processed information. Like the Rhydon statues we talked about earlier.
Yes. The Rhydon statues are a perfect example of efficient coding creating accidental magic.
How exactly did that happen?
To build the expansive maps of Kanto within the strict memory limits, the developers couldn't code unique properties for every single square on the grid. Instead, they used tile sets.
Right, grouping things together.
The game engine assigns specific hexadecimal values to different visual tiles, telling the game how the player can interact with them. For example, a wall tile has a collision value that stops movement. A grass tile has an interaction value that triggers random battles.
And a water tile has an interaction value that allows the player to use a fishing rod.
Exactly. To save memory, the programmers often grouped visually distinct tiles into the same interactive property arrays if they share basic characteristics.
Okay, I see where this is going.
The Rhydon statues are solid objects that you cannot walk through, much like a body of water. Due to an oversight in how the arrays were grouped, the tiles containing the Rhydon statues were assigned the same interactive properties as water tiles.
So the game engine literally cannot distinguish the mathematical difference between a solid stone sculpture and a pond?
It cannot. As a result, if you walk up to a Rhydon statue inside a heavily populated building, face it, and open your inventory to use an old rod or good rod, the game registers that you are interacting with a valid fishing tile.
That is amazing.
The animation plays, you cast your line directly into the solid stone, and you can successfully reel in a wild Magikarp or Goldeen.
Catching a live fish out of a rock statue inside a gymnasium, it is the purest distillation of 90s video game logic. It is a peaceful, harmless little glitch.
It really is.
But there is one detail buried in the game that isn't a glitch, and honestly, it is the most baffling piece of trivia in the entire franchise. It is an incredibly specific tease for a creature that would not exist for over a decade.
You were referring to the picnickers outside of Rock Tunnel?
Yes. If you navigate to the entrance of Rock Tunnel, there is a female NPC trainer standing in the grass. If you walk up and speak to her, she delivers a very specific, seemingly random line of dialogue.
What did she say?
She says, "The Pokemon here are so chunky, there should be a pink one with the floral pattern."
Within the context of the Kanto region and the original 151 monsters, that sentence is complete nonsense.
Complete nonsense.
There is no chunky pink Pokemon with a floral pattern anywhere in the game. Players spent hours searching the surrounding grass, assuming it was a clue for a hidden creature, but found nothing.
But flash forward exactly 14 years. Nintendo releases Generation 5, the black and white versions, and they introduce a brand new Pokemon named Muna.
And what is the exact physical description of Muna?
It is a chunky, floating taper, completely pink, and covered in a distinct pink and purple floral pattern. It is an absolute one-to-one match for the random dialogue spoken by an NPC 14 years earlier.
It's wild. The debate within the historian community is whether this is evidence of an impossibly long-term development pipeline or simply a retroactive Easter egg.
What's the consensus?
Well, Game Freak is known to archive thousands of unused concept sketches. It is entirely possible a sketch of a floral taper existed in 1995, an NPC was given dialogue referencing it, but the monster was cut for space, only to be resurrected a decade later.
Oh.
Alternatively, the designers of Generation 5 may have intentionally scoured the original game script for unresolved clues and custom-built mana to finally fulfill the picnicker's wish.
Regardless of how it happened, finding that dialogue now is like stumbling across a detailed sketch of a modern smartphone buried in a 1990 Sears catalog. It feels like an impossible temporal anomaly.
It really does.
And you know, when a video game presents a player with a world full of broken logic like fishing and statues, cryptic dialogue about non-existent floral monsters and burned-down mansions, the human brain naturally attempts to impose order on the chaos.
Right, we want to solve the puzzle.
We want to find the edges of the universe. And that innate human desire gave birth to the absolute golden era of playground myths.
The sociology of playground myths in the mid to late 90s is a fascinating study in pre-internet human communication.
It really was a different time.
Today, if a rumor surfaces about a hidden secret in a game, the community collectively data mines the software, fact-checks the claim on a wiki, and debunks it within a matter of hours.
Instantly.
But in 1998, information spread almost entirely through oral tradition. A kid on the playground would claim their older cousin in another state discovered a secret button combination.
And because dial-up internet was sparse and gaming magazines only published once a month, there was no way to instantly verify the claim.
And crucially, the rumors were believable because the game was already visibly broken.
Exactly. If a kid told you there was a secret god hidden under a car, you believed them because you had already personally experienced the missing no glitch that multiplied your items by scrambling the graphics into a barcode.
If the code is that fragile, anything is possible.
Which brings us to the most famous lie in gaming history, the legendary Mew truck.
The architecture of the Mew truck myth is brilliantly constructed. In Vermilion City, there is a port where a luxury cruise liner, the SS Anne, is docked.
Right.
If you walk along the pier before boarding the ship, the camera pans just far enough to reveal a small, isolated ledge of land sitting in the water just off the coast. And parked inexplicably on that tiny ledge is a single pickup truck.
A pickup truck. In a digital world where the only modes of transportation are bicycles or flying on the back of a giant bird,
Yeah, it stands out.
there are virtually no cars anywhere in the game, and yet here is a highly detailed, modern pickup truck parked on an island.
And the genius of its placements is that it is completely inaccessible during normal linear gameplay. The only way to traverse water and reach that ledge is by using the hidden machine move, surf.
But you don't get surf until way later.
Exactly. The player does not obtain the ability to surf until much later in the game, long after they have completed the events on the SS Anne. Once you complete those events, the ship permanently departs, and the game places an invisible barrier blocking access to the pier entirely.
So the developers dangle a completely unique graphical asset just out of reach, and then permanently lock the door before you have the tools to reach it. It drove an entire generation of kids absolutely insane.
But players discovered workarounds. If you had a friend who had already completed the game, they could trade you a high-level monster that already knew surf before you ever boarded the ship.
Or the battle glitch, right?
Right. Alternatively, you could exploit the battle mechanics. If you intentionally lost a battle on the ship, the game would teleport you back to the Pokémon Center to heal, completely bypassing the trigger that caused the ship to sail away.
Wow.
Once you eventually acquired surf naturally, you could walk back to the pier, surf across the water, and physically stand next to the truck.
You perform this incredibly complex sequence of sequence-breaking actions. You stand next to the Holy Grail, and the playground rumor dictated the final step.
The strength rumor.
Yes. The myth claimed that if you used the strength-enhancing move strength on the bumper of the truck, your character would push the vehicle aside, revealing a hidden Pokeball containing the mythical, unobtainable creature, Mew.
It was the perfect urban legend. It required secret knowledge, intense preparation, and mechanical execution. Millions of players spent hours shoving their digital avatars against the pixels of that truck.
But the reality is crushing. What was the truck, actually?
It was nothing. It was simply a leftover graphical asset.
Just a graphic.
Yeah. When map designers build levels, they often place decorative bounding boxes out of bounds to give the illusion of a larger world. It is highly likely the truck sprite was created during an early phase when the game was meant to look more modern, and a tired map designer simply dropped it onto the ledge as a piece of background scenery and forgot about it.
That is so funny.
It possessed no interaction values, it couldn't be moved, there was no Mew under the axle.
I have always compared the Mew truck to modern cryptid hunting. It is Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, but contained entirely within the silicon of a 2-inch cartridge.
That's a very apt comparison.
Even knowing it is fake, there is something profoundly nostalgic about remembering a time when a piece of software held a genuine, unsolvable mystery that you had to debate in hushed tones over a cafeteria table.
Another fantastic example of map design fueling paranoia was Bill's Secret Garden.
Oh, I remember that one.
The player encounters an eccentric researcher named Bill who lives in a cottage at the northern edge of the map. Behind his house, the map designers created a visible gap in the mountain range. It clearly looks like a pathway leading into a lush, hidden valley.
But if you try to walk through the gap, an invisible collision wall stops you. Because it visually looked like an entrance, every kid in '98 was convinced it was a locked gate. The rumor mill claimed that if you beat the Elite Four 50 times in a row without saving, or completed the Pokédex flawlessly, the invisible wall would drop. It would allow you to walk into a paradise where you could catch all 3 starter Pokémon, or find the mythical Pikablue.
Again, it was an illusion. The map simply ended there, and the gap in the mountains was just an aesthetic choice.
But these rumors regarding the mythical Mew were so potent.
They were deeply believed because the actual historical truth of how Mew was included in the game is even more miraculous than the truck myth.
Yes. The truth of Mew's existence is arguably the most rebellious act of programming in Nintendo's history.
We established earlier how suffocating the memory constraints were. The development team had finally finished compiling the master build of the game. The cartridge was entirely full.
So no room for anything else.
Well, at the very last stage of production, they stripped out the debug tools, the internal software scripts used by the developers to test encounters and fix bugs. Removing those tools cleared up a microscopic sliver of memory, exactly 300 bytes of free space.
I want to emphasize how small that is. 300 bytes. A standard text email signature is larger than 300 bytes. It is virtually nothing.
It is essentially a rounding error in modern computing. But a senior programmer named Shigeki Morimoto saw that empty space.
And what did he do?
Without seeking permission from Nintendo executives, and without telling the marketing department, Morimoto secretly wrote the hexadecimal data for a 151st creature Mew, and he crammed it into that 300-byte gap at the absolute last second before the game was shipped to manufacturing.
It was an act of digital vandalism.
It was incredibly risky. Altering the master code at that stage could have caused massive cascading memory leaks or corrupted the entire cartridge logic.
Wow.
Furthermore, Mew was never programmed to appear in the wild. It was meant to be a ghost, a hidden signature by the development team that no player would ever see.
But the game's code, as we know, was held together by duct tape.
Exactly. Because the code was so fragile, certain memory overload glitches caused the game to scramble its encounter tables.
And that brought Mew out.
Right. Players who triggered these specific glitches suddenly found themselves face to face with a creature that wasn't in the manual, wasn't on the poster, and wasn't acknowledged by the company.
Imagine being an executive at Nintendo. You launch a massive marketing campaign built entirely around the slogan, "Catch all 150." And a month later, thousands of letters start pouring in from children claiming they caught a 151st monster that you don't even know exists.
It was pure chaos.
Morimoto created a real-world mirage that ignited the franchise's popularity. And the strangest part of this slow-burn mystery is how the creature was finally introduced to the American audience.
Oh, this is great.
The first time kids in the US ever laid eyes on a Pokémon, it wasn't by playing the game, and it wasn't by watching the cartoon on Saturday mornings.
It was a brilliant piece of stealth marketing. Slightly before the localized games launched in the West, Nintendo released the Game Boy Camera, a peripheral that allowed you to take grainy, heavily pixelated, monochromatic digital selfies. The software included a feature where you could stamp digital stickers onto your photos. Several of those stickers were sprites of Pokémon, including Mew.
Millions of kids were stamping pictures of their faces with these bizarre, unidentifiable anime creatures, completely unaware that they were being subliminally prepped for the largest media franchise in human history.
This genius move.
Now, while the playground was buzzing with rumors about hidden traps and secret gardens, not all the theories were focused on mechanical exploits. Some of the most enduring, deeply analyzed theories within the community were entirely focused on narrative.
Because the graphical fidelity was so low, right?
Exactly, and the dialogue was so sparse, players spent hundreds of hours projecting massive emotional weight onto the few pixels that represented the characters. We wanted the world to have consequences.
And that psychological need for consequence brings us to one of the darkest, most compelling, and most debated fan theories in the history of the medium. The tragedy of your rival, Blue, and his Raticate.
Let's walk through this carefully, because if you accept the premise, it completely alters the moral alignment of your character. For context, Blue, or Gary, depending on the name you entered at the start, is the quintessential antagonist.
Very much so.
He is arrogant, he is constantly one step ahead of you, and he famously dismisses your efforts with the grating catchphrase, "Smell ya later." He is designed to be deeply unlikable.
He's a mechanical foil designed to test your progress at specific intervals. Throughout the early portions of the game, you battle Blues several times.
And he always has that one specific Pokemon.
Right. In his party, he consistently relies on a rat-like Pokemon named Rattata, which eventually evolves into a much larger, more aggressive form called Raticate.
Okay.
When you encounter Blue on the luxury cruise liner, the SS Anne, his team prominently features this powerful Raticate.
And it is a genuinely difficult fight for a lot of players. Raticate has an attack called Hyper Fang that deals a massive amount of physical damage, often tearing through your team if you aren't prepared.
It's a tough battle.
You finally manage to defeat him, the battle ends, you disembark, and the ship sails away.
The narrative progresses, and the next time you cross paths with Blue, the environmental setting has shifted drastically. You encounter him in Lavender Town, specifically inside a building known as the Pokémon Tower.
And the Pokémon Tower is not a gym or a laboratory. It is a multi-story, dedicated graveyard for deceased Pokémon.
Yeah. It is populated by grieving trainers mourning their lost companions, and the upper floors are haunted by literal restless spirits.
The entire tone of the game shifts here. The music becomes this haunting, descending melody. The color palette, if you were playing on a Super Game Boy, shifts to muted purples and grays. It is a deeply somber space.
When you approach Blue in the middle of this graveyard, his dialogue is highly unusual.
What does he say?
Instead of his standard boastful greeting, he says, "Hey, what brings you here? Your Pokemon don't look dead. I can at least make them faint. Let's go, pal."
And the battle immediately triggers.
But when the battle sequence begins, observant players noticed a glaring omission. From this encounter in the graveyard onward for the entire remainder of the game, Raticate is completely absent from Blue's team.
He never uses the creature again, which sparked the tragedy theory.
Exactly. The fan theory posits a very grim, linear sequence of events. It suggests that during your intense, violent battle on the SS Anne, Blue's Raticate suffered fatal injuries.
Oh, wow.
Because the cruise ship was crowded, chaotic, and immediately departed the dock after the battle, Blue was physically unable to reach a Pokemon Center, the in-game hospitals, in time to heal his partner.
And so...
The Raticate succumbed to its injuries and passed away.
So under this theory, when you encounter him in Lavender Town...
He is not there on an adventure. He is not there to catch ghosts. He is standing in a graveyard because he is actively mourning the death of his Raticate.
That completely recontextualizes his dialogue.
Right. His abrasive dialogue, "Your Pokemon don't look dead," is interpreted as a psychological defense mechanism. He is lashing out in grief, angry that your creatures survived the journey while his did not.
And the devastating core of the theory is that the player, through their relentless pursuit of victory on the ship, is directly responsible for the death.
Exactly. It fundamentally rewrites the hero's journey. You aren't just the plucky underdog overcoming a bully. You are the villain of his story. You are the reason a child is standing alone in a mausoleum.
It assigns an incredible amount of emotional devastation to 3 lines of text and a missing sprite.
It is a testament to the power of negative space in storytelling. By removing an element, the developers inadvertently created a vacuum that players filled with their own empathy and guilt.
Now, as the host, I have to step in and apply some cold, hard logic here. I push back heavily on the idea that the developers intended for you to be a murderer. Let's look at the mechanical reality of the game.
The mechanical counter theory is entirely devoid of sentimentality, but it is objectively more logical.
Blue's entire personality is defined by his ruthless obsession with becoming the absolute best trainer in the world. He is a min-maxer. In the early game, Raticate is a powerhouse because its base stats provide a huge advantage.
That's true.
But as you progress toward the late game, Raticate's stat scaling falls off a cliff. It becomes objectively weak compared to other options.
So what's the logical explanation?
The logical explanation is that Blue simply ventured into the wild, caught mathematically superior monsters like a Growlithe or an Execute, realized Raticate was holding his team back, and unceremoniously dumped the rat into his PC storage system to make room for an Alakazam.
Wow, harsh.
His dialogue in the tower wasn't a mask for profound grief. He was literally just trash-talking you, wondering why you were hanging out in a graveyard if your team was healthy enough to battle.
The mechanical logic absolutely supports that conclusion. The PC box system exists specifically so trainers can suckle out weaker team members. Blue was optimizing his party for the Elite Four.
He absolutely boxed that rat without a second thought. But, despite the cold logic, I think discarding the tragedy theory entirely misses the point of why we play these games.
How so?
The fact that millions of children collectively chose to believe the tragedy theory over the logical PC box theory is beautiful. It proves how deeply immersed we were in that 32 kilobyte world.
Yeah, we were totally invested.
The graphics were primitive blocks of monochrome pixels, the dialogue was restricted by severe memory limits, but our imaginations provided the emotional rendering. We wanted Blue to be a complex, three-dimensional character capable of experiencing profound loss rather than just a two-dimensional roadblock.
We wanted our actions in the game to have permanent moral consequences.
Exactly. The tragedy theory is a monument to the profound empathy players projected onto a digital universe.
It highlights the ultimate success of Satoshi Tajiri's original vision. He wanted to build a world that felt alive, a place where discovery and connection were paramount. If players are mourning the hypothetical death of a digital rat, the world has successfully transcended its code.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We have taken a slow, deliberate journey through the architecture of Kanto.
We really have.
We started with a boy in Machida catching beetles in a vanishing forest, leading to the creation of 151 digital creatures crammed into a plastic cartridge. We explored how the physical constraints of 32 kilobytes of RAM forced brilliant creative compromises.
From the backward engineered design of Charizard to the emotional permanence of a single save file caused by the sheer data weight of custom nicknames.
We examined the grounded reality of the Tajiri canon, uncovering the real-world artifacts left behind during the complex localization process. We navigated the cultural censorship of Viridian City, the linguistic trap of Magikarp Splash, and the severe hardware color limitations that forced the redesign of Jinx.
We walked through the haunting, silent storytelling of the charred Cinnabar Mansion, reading the visceral diaries of Mewtwo's birth.
We unpacked the sociology of playground myths, dissecting the psychological power of the Vermilion Truck, the 14-year Paraphic tease of Muna, and the rebellious 300-byte miracle of Mew's existence.
And finally, we weighed the emotional gravity of Arrival's missing Raticate, exploring the tension between mechanical optimization and player empathy.
Before we let you go, I want to extend one final enthusiastic reminder to visit our sponsor, Decoding the Dark, on YouTube.
It's a great channel.
If you loved peeling back the layers of Kanto today, and you have an appetite for meticulously researched deep dives into the hidden histories, lost media, and unsolved mysteries of our digital and pop culture, their channel is an absolute goldmine. Please open YouTube, search for Decoding the Dark, drop a like on their videos, and hit subscribe. It is the best way to support content that respects your curiosity.
The enduring legacy of these original games proves that sometimes the most profound experiences are not explicitly coded into the software. They exist in the negative space. The myths we construct to explain the glitches, the emotions we project onto the sprites, and the massive communities we build in our shared attempt to map an unexplored digital frontier.
And as you drift off today, perhaps thinking back to those late-night car rides, listening to the hum of the engine and waiting for the amber glow of a streetlight to reveal your screen, I want to leave you with one final bizarre statistical detail about Kanto to ponder.
Oh, what is it?
When you reflect on the environment of Generation 1, your memory probably defaults to the ocean. You think of water-type Pokémon. Squirtle, Lapras, Starmie, Magikarp, they're ubiquitous. The game constantly forces you to surf across massive bodies of water to progress.
Right, there is a lot of water.
But statistically, water was not the most common elemental type in Generation 1. Poison was.
Wait, really? Poison?
Yes, there were 36 poison-type Pokémon in Kanto, compared to only 33 water types. The grass is filled with toxic bugs. The caves are swarming with venomous bats. The cities are choked with sentient clouds of smog and sludge.
That is fascinating.
Why was this beautiful, nostalgic region, this virtual nature preserve, built explicitly to simulate the innocent joy of collecting insects in the woods, so incredibly mathematically toxic at its core?
I've never thought about it that way.
Was the overwhelming abundance of poison types a subconscious reflection of the encroaching, polluting urbanization that Tajiri watched pave over his childhood home of Machida? Was the digital world poisoned by the same industrial progress that destroyed his real-world forests? Or was it simply a quirky, unbalanced design choice made by a team of exhausted programmers trying to hit a deadline?
That is a great question to end on.
I invite you, the listener, to turn that over in your mind the next time you boot up a retro game. The answers are rarely in the manual, they're always hiding just beneath the pixels. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we wish you a very peaceful rest.